Hi tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. Let's get right into it because there's a lot to get to. Hello tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, and you know I bring it to you fresh every single time. And this time there's a lot to get to, starting with the recent topics in the week. So right now bipartisan calls have grown to remove Trump from office. After Trump decides he wants to threaten and destroy an entire civilization, lawmakers from both parties, including some former allies, are calling to invoke the 25th Amendment. They're arguing that this basic threat that Trump did amounted to advocating for mass civilization harm, and that's something that we're completely against as a nation. Take a listen.
I'm joined now by Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So a lot to talk about right now, but I think the first things first is in the aftermath of Donald Trump's kind of unhinged threat of basically annihilating the entirety of the Iranian population, which, you know, he's obviously since walked back from the edge on. Can you speak about the need, the call to invoke the 25th Amendment from Trump's cabinet members?
This shouldn't even be debated. He threatened genocide. He threatened to wipe out an entire Iranian people from the face of the earth. Of course, he needs to be removed from office. Of course, Democrats need to take every possible step, either by the invocation of the 25th Amendment or impeachment, to make sure that he's removed. This is about fighting for our moral vision of the country.
You know, that there are going to be Republicans who say this is just how Trump negotiates. He was never really going to do it. You Democrats are being too sensitive. And in the end, he got a deal anyway. So what would your reaction to that be?
America has never threatened evil. Even Richard Nixon, who came up with the madman theory, the unpredictability of a president, never threatened to annihilate all of the Vietnamese people. FDR never threatened to wipe out all the German people. Reagan never threatened to wipe out all the Russian people. There is something evil about a president threatening that, saying that America is indifferent to human life. And I don't care whether it's a negotiation technique. It compromises everything we believe in, which is the dignity of human life. There are plenty of other ways to be a bold negotiator and make credible threats short of genocide.
All right, tea sippers, there's a lot to discuss on this topic. So firstly, that was Brian Tyler Cohen from MSN Now, and he does his own, I think he started on YouTube as an influencer and did political commentary. If you haven't listened to him, you should. He's great. He's a younger Democrat, liberal, who kind of speaks from that perspective. But let's talk a little bit more about what's going on here. So this call to invoke the 25th Amendment pretty much intensified right after Trump sent out that tweet. And specifically what he put in the tweet was that a whole civilization will die tonight. Now, this was posted because Trump wanted them to open the strait. He released a bunch of other Truth Social messages about opening the fucking strait, as he put it in his message. Now, the escalation here isn't just coming from the United States, but also from around the world. There's been conversations between leaders that are kind of concerned that the United States is stirring up the pot overseas. But most importantly, let's talk about another perspective here. So Democrats were the first to mobilize against these comments. So with more than 80 House members and several senators publicly urging Vice President J.D. Vance and the cabinet to act now. Now, Representatives Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, were among the most vocal, describing the president as unhinged and dangerous. Now, from what we know from this, there was also some kind of like drama happening all over social media, if you will, from former MAGA members, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, right when Trump sent out that tweet, she reposted it and said 25th Amendment, condemning this threat as an evil and madness that is existing at the very, very top of the free world, right? So why does this threat trigger a constitutional crisis right now? Well, it's very, very clear. You know, it's following weeks of increasingly aggressive rhetoric towards Iran, so first and foremost, in regards to foreign affairs. But also, the threat also came with a specific deadline. So 8 p.m. the same night that he posted that on Truth Social. So although a 2-week ceasefire came out later, the damage is already done. Members of Congress have already argued that the president's willingness to threaten genocide demonstrated a breakdown in decision making, because that is obviously very anti-American. Now, other things to talk about here. So when it comes to the Democratic Party, obviously the Democrats publicly support invoking the 25th Amendment, but also the party leadership here has kind of been a little bit egregious in terms of being consistent and pushing back on the president. Now, with Republicans having majority of the control, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries signaled openness to a range of accountability mechanisms, which is kind of huge in terms of, crossing over towards where majority of the country is right now with these threats. So, Republican leadership, meanwhile, remained largely silent. Even those that criticized Trump's rhetoric stopped short of endorsing removal. They also were reflecting on the political reality that the 25th Amendment requires the vice president and majority of the cabinet, which are both currently aligned with the president. So there's a lot being talked around this, and PBS shared some news on that. And basically, there's no move to initiate the process whatsoever, especially coming from the right. Right now, we know that this isn't the first time that lawmakers floated the 25th Amendment from the current president. Obviously, there was a little bit of push earlier when he started to talk about purchasing Greenland. There's also commentators across the spectrum from AOC to Alex Jones framing this threat as like evidence of collapsing judgment. There's also talk about, military leaders had a duty to refuse unlawful orders, while others warned the president that his rhetoric already, triggered global conflict in the first place. So there's a lot to unpack, but most importantly, I think we have to look at this as a moment in history that we should not be proud of. No leader should be that unhinged, but what is happening right now is that his base and his supporters have allowed him to pretty much be this way. They kind of rally behind the president being unpredictable and, talking about how he speaks online is just his way of talking or speaking. And it's quite sad, given that he's also one of the richest people, according to what they're saying online, in the world, but also who was handed this power, along with all these other powerful people in power, that are probably encouraging the president to start conflict overseas to distract from the Epstein files. We know that there has been an ongoing investigation that has been halted by the removal of Pam Bondi and a few other members within the cabinet, and there's a lot of ignoring of this, and I think this should cause a lot of concern for a lot of people. I think right now we're looking at a situation where the president is trying to boast about how great he is and how he's bringing peace, but in fact 13 Americans died. We have thousands of civilians from Iran and overseas who have lost their lives, innocent women and children. So keep that in mind when going to the voting booth this year. It's getting completely absurd. It's becoming the point where all these news sources are sharing facts and information, and the White House is doing what they do best under a Trump administration, deflecting and trying to lie to the American people to distract us from the reality of the situation. So, this is quite interesting. This episode that Trump is trying to put out regarding this egregious attack just kind of like shows the fact that we should question his mental fitness and his ability to keep our country safe, especially considering that we're allowing him to retain control of the nuclear arsenal. Trump has power to do that. Now, just keep that in mind. Like, if you feel unsafe, if you're starting to feel like that this president doesn't value your America First ideology, it's not too late to put your money where your mouth is. It's just not. All right, tea sippers, it's time to continue spilling some more tea. I think it's time for us to also get a recent update on the SAVE Act and what's going on with that. So I pulled up a quick little clip here for us to take a quick listen to.
Under the Save America Act, individuals will be required to provide that proof of citizenship in order to register, and on election day, required to demonstrate voter identification.
The purpose of the SAFE Act is to ban non-citizens from voting in federal elections, and also to implement some kind of voter ID law where you would have to show your driver's license when you go to cast a ballot. My name is Justin Papp. I cover politics for CNBC. So the initial version of the SAVE Act that Chip Roy introduced and Mike Lee introduced in the Senate in late January would have required some form of ID at the ballot box that proved you were an American citizen. So something like a passport, for instance. There's an amended version of the SAVE Act that was introduced over the weekend that pares that back a little bit. Some form of photo ID would still be required at the polls to vote, but the list of acceptable forms of ID is longer and could include things like state-issued IDs. Importantly, college IDs are still prohibited under this amended version, which is a concern that many Democrats have, that Republicans are specifically targeting demographic groups, including young people, that tend to vote for Democrats.
So just to unpack this again, because I know we talked about it briefly, but this SAVE Act is going to be terrible for America. You know, and opponents have already come out and said what they said about it. And from that report from CNBC, right, they talked a little bit about what that means for the United States in terms of the Republicans are trying to go after people who are undocumented and saying that they're voting in droves or that there's illegal voting happening. We all know that that is a conspiracy theorist. And I cannot express that enough because non-citizen voting is already extremely rare. And existing penalties are severe. Like, we just know that. That's a part of the law that has been around since voting started, right? But this bill could also disenfranchise millions of eligible voters who lack ready access to documents. As mentioned, college students, right, who rely on their student ID as their form of identification. Now they're requiring students to either have a state ID or get a driver's license, which, you know, if that's what is required, then obviously that's what college students will have to do. However, this disenfranchisement of certain populations is very, very, very common, especially for Republicans. Specifically here, married women, older voters, and low-income voters are disproportionately affected because their documents might not match their current names, or it may be difficult to obtain a document, you know? And federal databases are not reliable for determining citizenship. Federal databases have been flagged. They are just awful. And there's a reason why there hasn't been much updates to the federal database system is because it's intended to not pull any strides in terms of the process of making things democratic, right? So, by using federal databases that are not reliable, we're already setting ourselves up for some kind of technical initiative that might not even work properly. We know that states would face major administrative burdens and costs here. And some legal scholars are also arguing that the bill may conflict with the Constitution's delegation of election administrative powers to the states. So let's talk about where the bill's now. So currently the bill just passed the House on April 10th in 2025, so a year ago from today. Yes, a year ago from today, actually. And now they received it in the Senate on the same day. Now, there hasn't been a Senate vote yet, and there's not a law. And the debate about this continues with sharply divided interpretations of this impact of this new SAVE Act, this Save America Act, when in reality we know it's Trump's way of playing to his base, who already tends to believe in a lot of conspiracy, and this is the one that he's willing to push because he still feels some type of way about losing the election in 2020. Not only did he lose the election in 2020, we also have to remember the actions of the president that day and those who stormed the Capitol. But most importantly, we have to look at the context that now the president has already pardoned all those people that were charged, and he is seeing this as a way for the country to not get behind him in our entirety. I don't know why he would need to worry about this, because he shouldn't even have any idea of wanting to run again for politics or do anything of that nature. Maybe he's trying to set this up for future Republicans. I don't know. But Trump is completely out of his mind. And the right is completely out of their mind. I think there's a lot to unpack here in regards to what this means. But most importantly, you know, with it requiring U.S. passports, birth certificates, some kind of certificate of naturalization, some kind of report, some kind of tribal citizenship document, it's just enough. Like, people should be able to go in and vote, register, see their name as being registered to vote, and fucking vote in the United States. There shouldn't be all these rules of dictating groups of people, especially when your intention is to disenfranchise the vote to keep white Christian Republican conservative people in power. And that's disgusting. Okay, T-Sipper, circling back to the war in Iran. So multiple outlets have already reported that the president announced a 2-week ceasefire after what happened with his threat of basically wiping out the entire civilization. We talked about it earlier in the episode. Now there's more attacks happening. So the U.S. and Israeli forces had already carried out extensive strikes on Iranian infrastructure in the hours and days leading up to the pause. So these attacks included Iranian universities and research facilities. It includes petrochemical plants. It includes power grid components. And of course, bridges and transportation nodes. So let's dive into why that is very relevant and important here. Because NBC has covered this extensively. But the details of this basically are completely opposite of what Iran's 10-point plan is and what it isn't. But I can tell you a little bit more about their plan. So the core elements reported by The Guardian, as mentioned, includes lifting all U.S. sanctions, continued Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, full U.S. military withdrawal from the Middle East, an end to U.S. and Israeli attacks, release of frozen Iranian assets, a binding UN Security Council resolution, and acceptance of nuclear enrichment, meaning, or including, if you will, the Farsi version, but missing from the English version. So that's very, very important because what they're trying to say is that they want to do it on their terms, in their way, and whatever is culturally important to them. So some additional context I will give, but let's hop into what NBC has to say about this. Take a listen.
Tonight, the ceasefire is under fire amid confusion over what the U.S., Israel, and Iran have actually agreed to. Israel today launching its biggest attacks yet against Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. The country's civil defense saying at least 254 people were killed and more than 1,100 wounded. Israel and the U.S. say the ceasefire does not include Lebanon, but Iran disagrees and now says it shut down the Strait of Hormuz yet again in retaliation. What's the White House response to that?
That is completely unacceptable. And again, this is a case of what they're saying publicly is different privately. We have seen an uptick of traffic in the strait today.
According to the tracking firm Marine Traffic, at least 3 ships have passed through the strait since the ceasefire began. 4 oil tankers are there right now, but none seem to be moving. Throughout the war, Iran has been charging ships that pass through the crucial waterway, but it's not clear whether the U.S. will allow those tolls to continue.
That's not something we've said that we've definitively accepted.
Still, the president today floating the idea of a potential joint venture between the U.S. and Iran to collect the tolls.
The joint venture is something that was proposed by the president, but he was very clear in his statement last night. He wants to see the strait reopened immediately without limitation.
The Trump administration touting its success in killing Iran's leadership, destroying its navy, and setting back its nuclear program.
Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory.
But adding to the uncertainty, Persian Gulf countries reporting dozens of Iranian missile and drone attacks since the ceasefire began. NBC's Keir Simmons is in Saudi Arabia.
Iran attacked oil infrastructure here in Saudi Arabia again today. And Bahrain, just across the water there, has been bombarded during this war. Tonight, Iranian strikes even after the ceasefire, angering America's Arab allies.
My God, this administration. And then if you're critical, you're considered anti-American, when in fact we should be very critical about anything related to foreign affairs. This is just absurd. There's still missile attacks and strikes happening overseas amid this ceasefire deal that Trump talked about a couple of days ago. And it's giving they're trying to control the narrative, which they always do. But when you lie and control the narrative, it just makes you look like you don't know what the hell's going on. So furthermore, the White House is out here announcing a ceasefire, right? Like they're basically saying that it's a reality show. We can control the strait and like put pressure on Iran. But NBC News, as we just listened to, is simultaneously reporting that the U.S. and Israeli strikes are still rolling around like someone forgot to hit pause on a ceasefire or people are just not following through. And Americans right now, we're watching this unfold like, oh, so the ceasefire is more of a vibe than an actual policy. And that's really, really, really relevant here because dropping a 10-point peace plan that looks different depending on which language you read it in doesn't help Iran, but most importantly, it doesn't help the United States. So I can understand that conflict. However, NBC has also highlighted that Iran is talking basically diplomacy on camera, while intelligence assets and assessments are showing that the moving pieces on the plan are not coming into play based on the continued strikes. So there's been this whole notion of we want peace in the Middle East, but in fact, you got to wear your helmets if you live over there. And that's so sad that those people have to go through that. And I don't trust any of y'all. I'm tired. You know, payments are going up. Grocery prices are not coming down. I did not ask for a reboot of the Cold War. I don't think any American did. And because people don't love mixed messages, this doesn't do anything for the president. We don't love threats of massive destruction. And most importantly, they're definitely starting to get us to feel like we should be loving this idea that America is taking back control and going into war and we have the best military in the world. That could be true, but this war was completely avoidable. And NBC has also reported the strikes are continuing, like I mentioned, but most importantly, public statements and behind-the-scenes drama is always happening, and there's a lot more that we don't know. So I'm personally allergic to war, and I'm tired of everyone acting like this chaos is completely normal. We've learned in our history what to do, and this big distraction just comes to show you that there's a plan in place, but no one's following it, and who would trust the president? I wouldn't. And a little honesty and transparency maybe would help us out. You know, breaking from all these crazy Iranian war headlines to actually focusing on the American people and what's happening with our pockets. I think that's super important. A few more things before we wrap up. Listen to this weird statement from Melania Trump.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect.
This morning, it's unclear what prompted the rare rebuke from the First Lady, but sources say that some White House officials were surprised, and it's also unclear if the president knew about the topic of the remarks. The First Lady was photographed in the early 2000s alongside her husband, Epstein, and convicted co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell, but she denies they were ever friends.
I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time.
And her name does appear in the Justice Department's Epstein files. An email exchange from October 2002 is signed with Love Melania, stating, "Dear G, how are you? Nice story about JE and NY Mag. You look great on the picture. I know you're very busy flying all over the world. How was Palm Beach? I cannot wait to go down. Give me a call when you're back in NY. Have a great time." Maxwell responding, saying, "Sweet P, thanks for the message. Actually, plans changed again and I am now back on my way to NY." Adding, "I will try and call though." The First Lady insists that back and forth was nothing more than casual.
My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence.
Wow. Thanks, ABC News, for that report. It's just kind of ironic that, you know, what are we supposed to do? Just ignore the fact that you were corresponding with a now convicted pedophile who was in charge of a sex trafficking ring for minors, and you and Trump were chummy with them, and you want the American people to just be like, oh, well, yeah, they're just trying to smear their name. No, where there's smoke, there's fire. And girl, Melania has got to be one of the worst first ladies that we've ever had in this history of this country. But most importantly, it comes to show you the cover-up continues, because with the president and the cabinet members and nobody being aware that she was going to make this statement or what the statement consisted of, I don't believe that. I think this is a ploy. I believe that she was plucked there to do that by her husband. I believe that this was a way for them to redirect the conversation on the Epstein files to make there be some sense of, you know, the First Lady and the President are both innocent from any wrongdoing, other than correspondence and going to parties. Unacceptable. I don't accept it. I think it's disgusting for it to come out and speak to us about this like we're all 5-year-old children or people who don't have any common sense. But I just see this more as Melania and Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and all these people are going to go down for covering up the most egregious crime that you could think of. The most egregious crime you can ever think of that impacted innocent children. Sexual acts on innocent children. And you were just chummy with her in an email? Why do you think we need to hear that? Interesting. We'll keep our nose and our feet on all in the fire on this because I feel like they need to be held to the fire. You know? They're putting us in this egregious bullshit, and that just means we need to be more aware and take information as it comes, because I don't believe a damn thing that Melania is saying. Okay, we'll end on a positive note because researchers have uncovered one of the most complete dinosaur embryos ever found. It was preserved inside a fossilized egg for roughly 70 million years. The specimen is nicknamed Baby Ying Lang, I believe. And it was discovered in southern China, and it comes from the late Cretaceous period. The egg itself is about 6.6 inches long, while the embryo stretches to about 9.3 inches, and its tiny skeleton is perfectly articulated. Reports are saying that the bones are connected in their natural position. The embryo is curled in a posture identical to modern bird embryos, a behavior known as tucking. And this posture is controlled by the central nervous system in birds and is essential for successful hatching. Now, the first definitive evidence of pre-hatching behavior has existed for several times, but this actually gives scientists a little bit more proof due to it being really, really well preserved. Now, thank you all so much for listening to Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. I hope that you all are taking the information with a grain of salt, but also digesting the seriousness of all of this and keeping yourself safe. You know, if the country decides to escalate things when it comes to the war, make sure you have your essentials, but most importantly, make sure you're connected with those in your life, because life is short and we know that things can go awry any moment of the day, week, year, moment. Thanks for listening. Take care.